Centuries ago, when steel decided the fate of nations, a storm rose in the south. One empire marched with 100,000 soldiers, their armor shining, their banners swallowing the horizon. Against them stood barely 60,000 men of Dai Viet, farmers, hunters, rebels, yet bound by one heart. They had no walls, no great fortresses, only their land and their will. When the invaders crossed the river, thinking victory assured, the sky itself turned against them. From the reeds came fire, from the mud rose thunder. The water that once mirrored heaven became their grave. Steel met bamboo, arrows met fire, and in that chaos, courage became a weapon mightier than any blade. When the smoke lifted, the conquerors were gone, and the land sang once more with freedom. Because here, in this corner of the world, a people without fear turned strategy into destiny and wrote their name into eternity. For more than a decade, the lands of Dai Viet had grown under the rule of the Ming Empire. From the Red River Delta to the mountain valleys, the sound of freedom was replaced by the clang of foreign garrisons and the cries of a people stripped of their dignity. The Ming believed their conquest complete. Their armies, armored in steel, disciplined and countless, looked down upon the peasant warriors of the south as little more than dust beneath imperial boots. But among the forests of Thanh Hoa, a leader was rising. His name was Le Loa, once a nobleman, now the soul of rebellion. To his followers, he was not merely a man, but the voice of the land itself. For years, he had fought a desperate war of survival, ambushing Ming patrols, fading into jungles, striking from rivers, then vanishing again. His army, forged from farmers and hunters, had become a phantom the invaders could never destroy. By 1426, the tide had turned. The Ming, weary of years of guerrilla warfare, gathered a massive force, over 100,000 men, under General Wang Tong. They marched south from Dong Quan, today's Hanoi, determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. Heavy cavalry, crossbow regiments, siege engines, and supply lines stretched across the Red River plains. Le Loa, commanding barely 60,000 soldiers, knew a direct clash would be suicide. His men were swift but lightly armed. They had no heavy armor, no grand fortresses, no endless supplies. Yet what they possessed was something far greater, the will of a nation reborn and leaders of extraordinary cunning. Among them were Lasat, Tran Nguyen Han, and Li Trien, men whose minds turned terrain into weapons. They studied every hill, every stream, every narrow path west of Dong Quan. There, near the twin villages of Tat Dong and Chuk Dong, the land curved around rivers and low dikes, a perfect snare for an arrogant invader. The plan was simple, yet audacious. Pretend defeat, draw the Ming army across the river, then strike when their formation broke. It was a dance between life and annihilation, between courage and deceit. As autumn clouds gathered over the northern plains, both armies prepared for war, one seeking to preserve an empire, the other to reclaim a homeland. The storm of Tat Dong was about to begin. Night fell across the northern plains like a silent shroud. In the camp of Le Loa, torches flickered along the riverside, their light dancing upon the armor of men who had long forgotten the warmth of home. They knew what awaited them. In the coming days, they would face an army twice their size, and perhaps never see the sunrise again. Yet there was no fear, only resolve. Le Loa stood before his commanders, his voice low but unyielding. "We cannot outnumber them," he said, "but we can outthink them. If we can make them believe we are broken, they will cross the river, and when they do, they will be ours." The generals listened in silence. Lasat, the stern strategist, marked the terrain on a rough map drawn in sand. To the west lay Tat Dong, a marshy plain where the river's bends could swallow entire formations. To the east, the village of Chuk Dong, surrounded by bamboo groves and hidden dikes, perfect for ambush. There, in those twin valleys of earth and water, the fate of an empire would be decided. The plan unfolded like the weaving of a spider's web. Scouts were sent ahead to feign retreat, burning small outposts to lure the Ming forward. Villagers were instructed to flee, spreading rumors that the rebels were scattering, that Le Loi had lost control. Meanwhile, the main force lay concealed behind the riverbanks. Hidden pits lined with sharpened stakes, bamboo traps buried under mud, and concealed trenches turned the open field into a killing ground. Across the plain, the Ming army moved with arrogance. General Wang Tong, confident in his numbers, dismissed the warnings of his sub-commanders. "They are cornered beasts," he said coldly. "Once we cross, we finish them." Drums thundered in their camp that night, loud, defiant, echoing into the misty darkness. On the opposite bank, Le Loi's soldiers crouched in silence. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, masking their movements. They could hear the enemy's songs, their laughter, their pride, and somewhere in that darkness, Le Loi whispered to his men, "Tomorrow the river will remember us." The night deepened. The trap was set. The morning mist clung to the river like a ghost. Then came the sound, a low rumble, distant at first, growing into a roar that shook the ground. The Ming army was on the move. Across the plains, banners unfurled like waves of crimson. Drums thundered. Horses screamed. 10,000 boots hammered the earth in rhythm with the heartbeat of conquest. The river boiled beneath their bridges of bamboo and rope. Ahead, the rebels seemed to have vanished. No resistance, no arrows, only the whisper of fog. But in that silence, death was waiting. Beneath the reeds, Le Loi's archers crouched with arrows drawn, faces streaked with mud. Behind earthen dikes, entire companies of spearmen lay still, eyes fixed on the crossing. They could hear everything. The clatter of armor, the splash of hooves, the proud laughter of men who believed victory was already theirs. Then, a cry. The first line of Ming soldiers stumbled. The ground beneath them split open. Hidden pits filled with sharpened stakes swallowed man and horse alike. Panic rippled through the ranks, but their commanders screamed for them to advance. "Forward!" Crush them, and the flood began. Thousands surged across the bridges, pressing against one another in the haze of confusion. That was when the horn of Lam San blew. One long, terrible note that tore through the valley, and everything changed. From the ridges, Tran Nguyen Han's cavalry burst forth like thunder. The earth trembled beneath their charge. Spears lowered. Hooves struck sparks from the stones. From the right flank, Li Trian's infantry erupted from the marshes, shouting the war cry of their fathers. "For Dai Viet!" Arrows screamed through the sky. Flaming bolts rained down, striking bridges and wagons. Bamboo planks caught fire. The river turned to flame. Men stumbled, blinded by smoke, trampled beneath their own horses. Le Loi raised his sword, the signal of retribution. "Strike now!" From all sides, the rebels surged like a rising tide. Drums pounded, spears flashed. Swords tore through armor with a sound like breaking iron. The Ming army, caught between river and fire, tried to fight back. But every formation they built collapsed before it could take shape. The air was thick with ash and screams. Bodies fell, waves of men collided, shields shattered, blood turned the mud black. Still the Lam Sun warriors pressed on, relentless, unyielding, unstoppable. By midday, the plain of Tat Dong was unrecognizable. What had begun as a march of conquest had become a massacre. The trap was no longer just a plan, it had become a storm. And at its heart rode Le Loi, blade in hand, carving his people's freedom into the history of the world. The plains of Tat Dong were burning behind them, but for the Ming army, the nightmare was only beginning. As the survivors fled east toward Chukdong, the land itself seemed to turn against them. The roads vanished into swamps, their horses sank into mud. Rain fell in sheets, turning the battlefield into a river of blood and fire. Through the haze of smoke, the Lam Sun banners appeared again, black and red against the storm. The rebels were already there. They had moved through hidden trails during the night, encircling the Ming from every direction. At the head of his army, Le Loi raised his sword toward the clouds. His voice cut through the thunder. "Burn their bridges! Let none escape!" And so it began, the second storm. From the ridges, Lasat's cavalry struck like lightning, smashing into the Ming flank. From the bamboo groves, Li Trian's infantry advanced, spears glinting through the mist. War drums pounded so fiercely that even the rain seemed to fall in rhythm. The sky itself trembled. The Ming, desperate and cornered, formed ranks near the marshes. General Wang Tong roared for order, rallying his troops beneath the imperial dragon banner. Arrows hissed, crossbows snapped. For a brief moment, they pushed back the tide. Then the rebels lit the sky. Fire arrows streaked upward, falling upon the Ming lines like a rain of comets. Carts exploded. Horses screamed. The entire horizon turned red. "Hold the bridge!" Wang Tong shouted. But there was no bridge left. It was already engulfed in flame, collapsing into the churning water below. His soldiers turned to run, but found Lam Sun warriors waiting in every direction. The river to their front, fire to their rear. There was nowhere left to go. The battle became chaos, a storm of steel, screams, and smoke. Men grappled in the mud, blades flashing, helmets rolling into the mire. The rain could not wash away the blood. Amid it all rode Le Loi, his armor blackened with soot, his eyes burning with the fury of a nation reborn. He cut through the enemy lines again and again, shouting only one command: "Forward!" When the sun finally broke through the clouds, it fell upon a field of silence. Thousands of Ming soldiers lay dead or drowning in the crimson river. The dragon banners were gone. Only the banners of Dai Viet remained, waving proudly in the smoke and light. Le Loi dismounted, looked upon the ruined plain, and whispered, "Today the land remembers who it belongs to." When the storm finally ended, silence fell upon the land. Only the hiss of dying fires and the slow murmur of the river remained. The battlefield of Chuk Dong lay beneath a shroud of smoke, a graveyard of broken spears and fallen banners. The Ming army had ceased to exist. More than 50,000 men had been swallowed by the rivers and fields of Dai Viet. Their armor, once symbols of imperial might, now rusted in the mud. Of all the generals who had crossed the river that morning, only Wang Tong and a handful of officers managed to escape, fleeing north toward Dongquan, their pride shattered, their dreams drowned in red water. Le Loi stood at the center of the desolation. Around him, his soldiers knelt in silence, faces streaked with ash and rain. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly he raised his sword, not in triumph, but in remembrance. "For those who fell before us," he whispered, "and for those who will never kneel again." The drums of Lam San sounded once more, not for battle, but for victory. Messengers rode through the villages, spreading the news that the invincible Ming army had been destroyed, that the land of Dai Viet had risen from its chains. Every temple bell, every mountain echo carried the same word: freedom. In Dongquan, panic swept the garrison. Wang Tong locked the city gates, ordering his troops to fortify the walls. He sent desperate letters to China, begging for reinforcements. But deep in his heart, he knew the truth. The empire had lost its grip on this land. Meanwhile, the Lam San army gathered once more. Under banners soaked in rain and victory, they began their march north. Villagers lined the roads, offering rice, water, and tears of gratitude. Children cheered their names. Old men bowed with trembling hands. The songs of liberation followed them like the wind. As the sun set over the Red River plain, Le Loi looked toward the horizon where Dongquan awaited. Beyond those walls stood the last chain of the invaders, and he swore, by the blood of every man who had fallen, that before another year passed, Dai Viet would be free. Winter came early that year. Cold winds swept across the Red River plains, carrying the echo of drums and the promise of freedom. The Lam Sun army had surrounded Dong Quan, the last fortress of the Ming in Dai Viet. Inside its stone walls, General Wang Tong and his men starved and trembled, their banners torn, their pride long broken. For months, Le Loi refused to storm the city outright. He knew patience was deadlier than any blade. His generals cut every supply route, sealing the Ming inside their own prison. What had once been an army became a shadow, a collection of hungry, haunted faces staring out from behind crumbling battlements. Then, one gray dawn, the gates of Dong Quan opened. Wang Tong rode out beneath a flag of surrender, his armor dulled, his eyes hollow. He dismounted before the Le Loi and bowed low to the ground. In that silence, the wind carried only one sound, the beating of hearts. Le Loi looked down at his defeated foe, then turned to the thousands who had gathered across the plains. "Enough blood has been spilled," he said quietly. "Let those who wish to live, live. Our vengeance ends today. Our nation begins again." A murmur spread through the ranks, disbelief, then relief, then thunderous joy. The banners of Dai Viet rose high over Dong Quan. The Red River shimmered with sunlight once more. After 20 years of occupation, the land breathed free. Messengers galloped through every province, bearing the news that would echo for centuries. The Ming were gone. The war was over. Dai Viet was whole again. In the capital, the bells of Thang Long rang for 3 days and nights. Temples reopened. Farmers returned to their fields. And in every village, mothers told their children the same story of how a nation thought lost had risen again. At sunset, standing upon the ramparts of Dong Quan, Le Loi watched the sky turn gold. He sheathed his sword and whispered, "May this blade never have to be drawn again." The war was over, but the legend of Bin Ngo Dai Thang, the great victory of the pacification of the Ming, had only just begun.